My name is Ethan. I'm 52 years old, and last month my parents quietly removed my name from the company history. I helped them build the company I sacrificed my 30s to save. I never wanted the spotlight. I was the infrastructure guy, the one in the back room fixing servers, rewriting tax software after 2008 nearly ruined us. My parents ran the front of the house, my sister handled client accounts, and I kept the system running. We were the kind of family business you see in Chamber of Commerce ads, 4 smiling faces, a ribbon cutting a plaque from the mayor. But what people never saw was who kept the firewall from collapsing or stayed up till 2 a.m. rebalancing client files when QuickBooks glitched. That was me. For 27 years, I said yes to everything. Co-signed the mortgage when the expansion failed. Paid for my niece's private school tuition when the company had a cash flow issue. Designed a proprietary backup system that prevented our firm from getting sued during the ransomware wave in 2017. No one ever thanked me. Not once. But I wasn't looking for applause. I was trying to keep the family legacy alive, even if it came at the cost of my own. Then came the refinancing meeting. It was supposed to be routine. Mr. Lanning, our financial advisor of 15 years, accidentally CC'd me on an email titled Re-Stakeholder Adjustments for Ownership Clarity. I opened it, thinking it was about our annual audit. Instead, I saw a revised structure of the firm, with only 2 listed stakeholders, my father and my sister. My name wasn't just missing. It had been replaced by Chase, my brother-in-law, an IT freelancer with barely a 2-year certification and a history of subcontracting out anything more complex than printer installations. Chase, who once told a client that cloud storage is just a trend. I thought it was a clerical error, a draft, something that hadn't been finalized, until I asked my dad, and he said without looking up from his desk, "We just figured it made more sense going forward. You're more of a back-end presence." I was 52. I had no children, no pension, no property of my own. I had funneled my adult life into theirs under the illusion that one day when they stepped back, I'd inherit not just equity, but acknowledgement. Instead, I got quietly erased. My sister said I was overreacting, that it was just paperwork, that I was being too sensitive for a man your age. What they didn't know was that I still had admin rights to the entire company network, including their email logs. Including a folder Chase thought he deleted detailing plans to restructure the company and phase me out entirely before the SBA small business grant period opened that spring. They weren't just moving on. They were replacing me because they assumed I wouldn't notice, or worse, wouldn't fight back. What they forgot is that systems remember everything. That night, I drove to see Reverend Clarice, a family friend, who also happened to be the only one who remembered that I once rewired the accounting database of the church for free after the former treasurer nearly tanked it. She looked at me and said, "They built a future on your silence. Maybe it's time they hear your voice." So I made a list. By the time I finished it, it wasn't just names and tasks. It was a roadmap. I didn't want revenge. I wanted clarity. And maybe, just maybe, a legacy worth my name. But what I uncovered next would change more than just the firm. It would expose every false assumption my family ever made about who really held it all together. I didn't sleep that night, not because of rage, but because something colder had taken root. A clarity I hadn't felt in years. I brewed coffee at 4:00 a.m., the kind I used to drink during audit season, and pulled the old disaster recovery binder from the credenza in my den. The cover still bore a faded label, Company Contingency, Reverend 3, 2011. I ran my fingers over it like one might handle a yearbook or obituary, a relic of faith in a system I no longer believed in. The list grew more precise with every sip. Password registry, certificate chains, API key ownership. Even the lease for the offsite server vault in Calgary was still in my name. I wasn't just the architect, I was the foundation. And they'd never bothered to look under the floorboards. By sunrise, I had already migrated the critical DNS entries into a sandbox. Not to sabotage, I'm not a child, but to signal ownership, to remind them what they'd taken for granted. At 9:12 a.m., my sister sent a group text. "Can you check the remote access for Chase? He says his admin privileges are bugging out. I didn't reply. Instead, I called Lily my niece. She's 25, pursuing her MBA, and despite being raised in the glow of her mother's ambitions, she'd always asked the right questions. During Thanksgiving, 2 years ago, she asked me if I thought our family business was ethical. I had deflected, joking about QuickBooks licenses. She hadn't laughed. When I told her what I'd discovered about the ownership changes, the emails, the silent erasure, she didn't gasp. She went quiet, then said, I figured something was happening. Mom's been treating Chase like he's the next CEO. She said that out loud, I asked. She didn't have to, Lily replied. They started calling him our tech lead in front of clients. I felt the heat rise in my chest, not anger, but that old sensation of being studied but never seen. Lily asked me one question before we ended the call. Uncle Ethan, are you going to let this define you or finally define yourself? I didn't answer, but the question haunted me. That afternoon, I went to visit my grandfather, Henry, 88, mostly confined to a high-backed chair in a retirement facility off the highway. Once the founder of the original accounting office in the 60s, long before it became Hamilton and Daughters. The room smelled like lemon disinfectant and regret. He blinked when I walked in, then smiled faintly. You look tired, he said. I'm awake, I replied. We sat in silence for a while, watching a Golf Channel rerun neither of us cared about. Then I pulled out the manila folder I had brought a printed copy of the revised stakeholder plan. I watched his eyes move slowly across the page. He didn't flinch, didn't ask for clarification. After a long pause, he said, I always knew they'd do something like this. You did? He nodded. That's why I left a letter. Sealed. Gave it to Clarice years ago. Told her only to give it to you if they tried to cut you out. My throat tightened. Why? Because I saw who stayed late, who fixed things without being asked. I was harsh on you growing up, I know that. But I never mistook silence for insignificance. When I left, I drove straight to the church. Clarice was in her office polishing silverware for a communion that had been postponed due to budget constraints. When I mentioned the letter, she didn't hesitate. Opened a drawer, pulled out a small ivory envelope marked in Henry's neat cursive to Ethan when they forget who built it. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I placed it in the glove box of my car next to the emergency flash drive that held every version of our accounting software's source code. 2 objects side by side, testament and tool. Back home, the calls had started. First my mother, then my father. Voicemails that walked the tightrope between casual concern and veiled admonishment. Your sister says you've been distant, my father said in one. We need you back in the loop. Back, as if I'd ever left. That evening, I logged into the admin portal and documented everything, dates, access logs, billing history, license, ownerships. I wasn't preparing for war. I was preparing a map, a truth they couldn't delete. I also began something I hadn't done in decades, applying for my own EIN. Ethan Systems would no longer be a back-end ghost hidden in their infrastructure. I was going to build something under my name, but before I could press submit, a new name popped up in my inbox. Chase. Hey man, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Can we talk? I stared at it for a long moment. Part of me wanted to ignore it. But another part, the part that remembered him calling me a legacy liability in that deleted folder, wanted answers. So I replied, meet me at the coffee shop across from the courthouse. Noon tomorrow. Bring everything you've told them about me. I hit send, and suddenly it wasn't about revenge. It was about restoration. The coffee shop was nearly empty when I arrived, just a retired couple arguing gently over crossword clues, and a young mother nursing a cappuccino while rocking a stroller with her foot. I chose a table by the window, the one with the unobstructed view of the courthouse steps, and ordered black coffee without sugar. I wanted to be alert, not comforted. Chase was late by 12 minutes. Not enough to seem disrespectful, but enough to assert that he didn't feel rushed. He wore a heather gray quarter zip and slacks that still had the tailor's crease. He looked more like a salesman than a technician. He slid into the chair across from me and offered a faint smile. Appreciate you meeting me. I didn't respond, just nodded once and waited. He tapped the table nervously. So, look, there's been a lot of chatter lately. Your dad's worried, your sister's... Well, let's just say she's under pressure. There's this narrative forming that you're sabotaging the firm," I finished. He winced. "Those weren't my words." I folded my hands. "But you didn't stop them either." Chase exhaled and leaned back. "Ethan, I didn't want this to get personal. I just saw an opportunity. Your folks have been trying to modernize. New workflows, cloud systems. They thought I could help. They thought you could replace me." "No," he said quickly. "They thought you wouldn't mind." I laughed, not out of humor, but the bitter clarity of hearing a truth no one wanted to say plainly. They didn't think I'd mind being erased because I never fought for space in the frame. "They're applying for the SBA tech grant next quarter," Chase continued. "There's a clause about innovation leadership. They thought I'd be a more media-friendly face." I stared at him, and for a long moment, I didn't feel anger. I felt recognition. Chase wasn't evil. He was an opportunist in a system that rewards visibility over value. He played the game the way it was designed, but it was still my game, and I had built the board. I reached into my satchel and placed a USB drive on the table. "Here's everything. Access logs, code signatures, administrator records, email backups. You'll see who built the architecture, who held it up when the cloud migration failed, who patched the security flaw last winter before the IRS caught wind." He reached for it, but I pulled it back. "It's not a threat," I said. "It's a record." Chase nodded slowly, a flicker of respect softening his expression. "What do you want from me?" "Clarity, and for once, honesty. Tell my parents what really happened when the payroll system crashed. Tell them who fixed it." He hesitated. "They won't want to hear it. Then let them sit in the silence." We parted with a tense handshake. I left the drive in his palm not because I trusted him, but because I wanted him to carry the weight of truth for once. That evening, Lily called. Her voice was shaky. "I lost the internship," she said. The firm's reputation flagged a concern. They said the audit chatter spooked the compliance board. I closed my eyes. One more casualty of their carelessness. "Did you tell them the truth?" I asked. "I tried, but they said it's a family dispute, and they don't want to get in the middle." That phrase, family dispute, struck me harder than I expected. It wasn't a dispute. It was a history of quiet exploitation dressed in holiday sweaters and passive-aggressive thank you cards. I drove to see her that night. She lived in a modest apartment above a law office, the kind with scuffed hardwood floors and a window unit that rattled when it ran. She looked tired, older than 25, the kind of older you get from fighting battles that weren't yours. She made tea. I brought the letter, Henry's letter. I'd read it the night before, finally, after staring at the seal until my hands went numb. It was short, just 4 paragraphs. But in those words was a confession I never expected, that he had always known I'd carry the weight, that he regretted not defending me earlier, that he hoped one day I'd forgive the silence. I let Lily read it. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. "I wish they saw you the way he did," she whispered. "They don't need to anymore," I said, "but you do." That was the moment I knew something had shifted. I wasn't just reclaiming dignity. I was shaping inheritance not of assets, but of integrity. The next morning, I filed paperwork to dissolve my administrative link to the original firm. It was symbolic, but powerful, like removing your name from a toxic family photo. Later that week, Reverend Clarice invited me to speak at a community tech forum she was hosting, Digital Legacies Building Systems That Outlive Us. I laughed at the title, but something about it felt apt. Maybe because I no longer felt like a ghost in someone else's infrastructure. I was becoming the architect of my own. Before the forum began, she handed me a folder. Inside was a printed record of every system I'd installed at the church since 2006. Security databases, even the donation portal. At the bottom, she'd handwritten, "You've always built cathedrals they refused to enter." But others noticed. I spoke that night not with bitterness, but with resolve. I talked about redundancy, about off-site backups, about designing systems to survive betrayal. The room was full of small business owners, retirees launching second careers, a few grandmothers curious about the cloud. They nodded when I spoke of being overlooked. They understood when I described being needed but never thanked. When I left the stage, one man approached me. Gray suit, calloused hands. "You said something up there," he said. "Every failure leaves a fingerprint in the log files." That hit me. I smiled. Truth always leaves a trail. And as I drove home past the office building that once bore our name, I saw the lights still on. They were likely trying to recover the systems I had let go dormant. They could try, but some legacies are harder to reboot. The following week arrived like winter on a still lake, quiet but dense with tension under the surface. I didn't hear from my parents. Not a single call, not a single text. My sister sent a brief message. "You've made your point. Can we please move on?" It was a curious sentence, that one. As if clarity were a tantrum. As if 27 years of silent labor could be swept aside with 6 words typed on a lunch break. I didn't respond. Instead, I focused on something constructive. With Lily's help, I began sketching out a framework for a new consultancy digital infrastructure for legacy firms struggling with modernization. Ethan Systems was too modest a name now. She proposed Foundation Node. I wasn't sure about the branding, but I liked the implication, the invisible layer that holds everything else upright. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent decades designing resilience for others, and now in the shadow of familial exile, I was learning to build it for myself. Then came the certified letter. Postmarked from my parents' firm, signed by their attorney, a polite but unmistakable cease and desist. It accused me of tampering with proprietary systems and demanded an immediate return of all firm-related assets and passwords. I read it twice, then once more. They weren't just trying to erase me now. They were trying to rewrite the narrative entirely. I was no longer the overlooked son. I was being recast as the saboteur. I walked to the desk drawer where I'd placed Henry's letter and pulled it out again. Ran my thumb along the edge. There, beneath his signature, he had scribbled a quote, "They will know who you are not by what you destroy, but by what you refuse to let collapse." It struck me then not as comfort, but as direction. I forwarded the cease and desist to my lawyer, Martin Lynn, a man I'd once helped recover his firm's files after a ransomware breach. Martin read the letter, then looked across the desk at me and said, "They're bluffing, and they're scared. You're not a liability, Ethan. You're evidence." We filed a formal response, a detailed record of my authorship on all relevant systems, complete with audit trails and license keys. Attached was a notarized copy of Henry's letter. Not to escalate, but to document. It wasn't a lawsuit, it was a ledger correction. The next day, Lily forwarded me a screenshot from the firm's internal Slack thread. One of her friends still worked there, quietly. A message from my sister. "This is what happens when you let the invisible ones think they matter." I stared at the line for a long time. The invisible ones. I remembered every birthday I worked through. Every weekend I spent restoring server access while they went wine tasting in Napa. The vacation I canceled in 2013 to meet a client deadline, and the thank you that never came. This wasn't about systems anymore. It was about erasure. I went to visit Reverend Clarice again. Not for advice, but to return something, the ivory envelope Henry had entrusted her with. She accepted it wordlessly, and for a moment we just sat there in the quiet geometry of her study, surrounded by old hymnals and donation ledgers. "I keep thinking about legacy," I said. She nodded. "It's what we leave behind in others. And what if they resent the part of us they took most from?" She looked at me, eyes calm but firm. "Then we teach them what it costs to pretend otherwise." Outside, the wind picked up. Leaves rustled against the stained glass. I thought of that USB drive Chase still had, whether he'd read it, whether he understood the full scope of what he'd inherited or rather attempted to steal. I didn't hate him, but I pitied him. He hadn't built anything of his own, and even now he was clinging to a framework that had never been designed to hold him. 2 days later he called. His voice was tentative, less performative than usual. "I read the logs," he said. "Everything you documented. I didn't know how deep it ran." "You didn't ask," I replied. "I wanted to be useful," he admitted. "But I see now I was used." He paused. "I told them I won't be part of the grant proposal." I withdrew. It was unexpected. Not redemption, but awareness. A beginning. I thanked him but didn't offer absolution. Instead, I told him the truth. It's not about credit, Chase. It's about memory. Systems fail when they forget what they were built for. That night, I opened a drawer I hadn't touched in years. Inside was the first external hard drive I ever bought. 120 gigabyte matte black with a click-wheel interface. It had my initials scratched into the casing EH05. I plugged it in. It whirred like a relic, slow but steady. On it were backup files from the early days of the firm, before cloud, before expansion, before the logo redesign my sister insisted on. Payroll sheets, family photos from the ribbon cutting, even a Word document labeled Dad's Retirement Speech Draft, V2. I opened it. It was unfinished, but in it one line stood out. None of this would exist without Ethan's quiet genius. He's the reason we survived. He never read that version aloud. I doubt he even remembers writing it. But there it was, dated, signed, time-stamped. I copied it to a folder labeled Records They Forgot. And then I did something I never imagined. I printed it, framed it, hung it above my desk. Not for them, for me. Next to it, I placed Henry's quote. And beneath both, I wrote the mission statement for Foundation Node. We build systems the right way to remember. The next few weeks passed in a rhythm I hadn't felt since my late 30s, measured, deliberate, but infused with purpose. Foundation Node took form not as a rebellion, but as a reclamation. Each file I uploaded to the server, each architecture blueprint I revised, was a quiet declaration: I am not gone. I am not erased. I am building in full daylight now. Lily came by most afternoons after her classes. We'd set up a shared workspace in the sunroom, what used to be my storage overflow room. It now held dual monitors, a standing desk she insisted on, and the old walnut bookshelf my mother had gifted me in 1994 when I finally got serious about business. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. One evening, as we cataloged our first 3 clients' small legal offices referred by Clarissa's network, Lily looked up and asked, "Do you think they'll ever apologize?" I didn't answer right away, because what was an apology now? A rearrangement of words, a late-stage recognition of early-stage theft. "They'll justify," I said finally. That's how legacy works in their minds. Ownership of truth by volume, not accuracy. She didn't press, but her silence told me she understood. The moral center of the family had shifted, and she had chosen where to stand. Then came the call. Not from my sister, not from my mother, from my father. It came just before dinner, a time he used to reserve for what he called financial digestion, his post-meal routine of reviewing bank statements and watching Bloomberg on mute. I let it ring 3 times before I picked up. His voice was careful, not tentative, but tempered like someone trained in legalese. "We've had a few client concerns," he said. "Some legacy systems aren't syncing with the cloud suite. We were hoping you might clarify what modifications you made." Modifications. I wanted to laugh, but the weight of years pressed that instinct into something quieter. "Dad," I said, "I didn't make changes. I simply withdrew." He hesitated. "That's not how clients see it." "And how did they see my name on the stakeholder list?" I countered. "Because I don't recall any explanation being given when I vanished from the firm's website." There was a pause long enough to be a sentence. "Then this doesn't have to be how we end things." I breathed in slowly, looked across the room at the framed quote above my desk. Henry's handwriting faint under glass. "It already ended, Dad," I said. "You're just now reading the log file." He said nothing after that, just hung up. And in the silence that followed, I realized something had shifted not in him, but in me. I didn't want them to understand anymore. I wanted to live beyond their capacity to distort me. The next morning, I visited Henry's grave. First time in a decade. I brought a flash drive not out of habit, but as a token, a kind of offering. Inside it was the legacy audit I'd completed the week before, an objective account of my contributions to the firm, timestamps, project files, performance analytics. I placed it beneath the stone, not because he needed the data, but because I needed to lay something down. As I turned to leave, I noticed a familiar car parked at a distance. Chase. He stepped out without theatrics, hands in his pockets, no laptop, no excuse. "I read the framework draft you shared," he said. "I didn't send it to you," I replied. "Lily did." That surprised me, but I said nothing. "You're building something real," he added. "I always was." He looked down at the soil between us, then back up. "I'm leaving the firm." That did catch me off guard. "Why?" "They asked me to spin a story about your exit, about sabotage." I told them I wouldn't. A long pause passed between us. Then he said something unexpected. "I'm applying for a role at your consultancy. Entry level. No shortcuts. I want to learn for real this time." I looked at him, really looked. And I saw no arrogance in his eyes, only fatigue, and a desire for weight that meant something. "I'll consider it," I said. He nodded, then turned and walked back to his car. I didn't watch him leave. I returned home to find Lily prepping a pitch deck for our first investor call. Her sleeves were rolled, her hair tied back in a way that reminded me of her mother 2 decades ago before ambition became armor. She turned and smiled. "You ready?" "More than I've ever been." That night, I opened a journal I hadn't touched in years. The leather cracked at the spine, the pages still smelled faintly of glue and printer ink. I wrote a single line. Some inherit names, others inherit silence. But a few of us decide what those inheritances become. The investor call was scheduled for a Wednesday morning. Nothing symbolic about that, just the only window where Lily's mentor at the university could patch in without rescheduling his tax litigation cases. We weren't asking for much. Seed funding, modest infrastructure, a bridge to proof of concept. But that morning felt heavier than capital, because the night before I'd received an envelope, unmarked, no return address, and delivered. Inside was a typed letter from my mother, the kind that sounded like it had passed through 3 sets of lawyers and 1 reluctant conscience. She didn't say she was sorry. She said she was distressed by the recent escalation and concerned about the direction things had taken. She hoped in closing that I would not let this rift define our family history. It wasn't what I wanted to hear, but it told me what I needed to know. They were still trying to write the last chapter in my voice without giving me the pen. I folded the letter, placed it beside the framed quote from Henry, and left it there like an artifact, another relic of a family more comfortable with control than accountability. The investor call went smoothly. Lily fielded most of the numbers, weaving narratives between margins and market positioning like she was born for it. I stayed quiet until the final slide where she turned and introduced me with 1 line. "And this is Ethan. He's the architect behind the systems most firms are still trying to copy without knowing who designed them." They smiled. I spoke not as a pitchman, but as a builder. I explained our value proposition in quiet terms: transparency, resilience, digital ethics for aging infrastructures. No buzzwords, no inflated graphs, just a blueprint built on scars. We secured soft commitments from 2 of the 3 attendees. Afterward, as we shut down our laptops, Lily looked at me and asked, "Are you proud?" I considered that. Pride had always been complicated for me, too close to vanity, too vulnerable to conditional love. But in that moment, I felt something close to peace. "I'm becoming," I said. That night, as the rain tapped the windows in a rhythmic code, I sat with a different folder, one I hadn't opened in a decade. Legal paperwork, power of attorney, forms, property documents, old trust proposals that had never been executed. Among them was the co-signer file for my parents' mortgage refinance. I hadn't thought about it since the day the rates reset, and I quietly took on the risk they no longer qualified for. At the time, it felt like duty. Now, it felt like unfinished business. I drafted a letter to their lender formally requesting removal of my name. I attached my attorney's supporting documentation along with proof of income from Foundation Node showing I no longer shared financial interest with the original firm. I signed it, not out of anger, out of clarity. The next morning I mailed it. 2 weeks later, my father called again. The voice on the other end was quieter, not frail but diminished. "They're going to raise the interest rate without your name," he said. "We can't afford the adjustment." I didn't say anything. I should have talked to you before he added. "But your sister, she was persuasive." Still no apology, just allocation. I waited. Then he said, "We may have to sell the building." I didn't offer rescue. Instead, I asked, "Do you remember the day I stayed up 30 hours reprogramming the ledger system after the 2008 crash?" He hesitated, vaguely. "I remember every keystroke I said, because I thought legacy was earned through loyalty. But it turns out it's written by those who keep the receipts." He didn't hang up this time, just exhaled. Then very quietly, we were wrong. It wasn't enough, but it was true. And sometimes in families, that's all you ever get. After the call, I took the original disaster recovery binder from the shelf. the one with the 2011 revision, Henry's handwritten notes still in the margins. I removed the last page. Then I burned it. A symbolic act, not of vengeance, but release. 3 months later, Foundation Node was featured in a mid-tier industry publication. Nothing headline-grabbing. Just a profile on ethical infrastructure startups led by industry veterans. They used a photo of me and Lily at our whiteboard diagrams half erased behind us. The caption read, "From legacy to leadership, a quiet revolution." That same week, Clarisse sent me a text. "Your father came by. Didn't stay for the sermon. Just sat in the back pew and stared at the server room door." I didn't reply. I just looked out my window at the early winter dusk, the way the light leaned across my desk, hitting the framed quote that had become more compass than comfort. Then I opened my journal, wrote one final line. I was never invisible. I was just storing energy. And now, I was live. Story 2. My sister said, "You're embarrassing for my influencer friends." I therefore shut off her party's electricity and had her imprisoned for fraud. She made an online post. I am a 30-year-old boy who has always been the family's responsible member. For roughly 10 years, I have been employed as a construction foreman. My back aches from years of heavy lifting, but the money is nice. I started out as a basic worker at the age of 22. And through perseverance and daily attendance, even when I was ill or hurt, I worked my way up. After 3 years, my boss took notice and gave me a promotion. These days, I manage a team that focuses mostly on business projects like office renovations and strip malls. My 58 and 60-year-old parents, Ron and Diane, have always been terrible with money. However, this was not always the case. My mother worked part-time at a dentist's office, and my father worked at a paper mill when I was a child. We had plenty, but we weren't rich. Things took a turn for the worse after the mill closed when I was a high school student. Dad changed jobs frequently and never found a steady job. They had already become used to a lifestyle that they could no longer afford, but Mom started working full-time. They started using credit cards for everything. They couldn't afford a vacation or a new television. Auto repairs, you guessed it. They were drowning in debt by the time I graduated from high school, but they acted as though nothing was wrong. With their finances in ruins, I was unable to afford college and immediately entered the construction industry, while residing at home in order to assist with the costs. Even worse has been my 27-year-old younger sister, Lena. In reality, she is just another regular girl who shares filtered photos and unboxing videos with her depressing 1,200 followers despite calling herself an aspiring content creator. She claims to be the next Kylie Jenner or something, and last year she spent $900 on a ring light setup. It doesn't matter that she spent 5 years studying communications at the public university. She kept changing her mind, so she took an extra year to graduate, and now her degree is somewhere collecting dust. She spent 8 months working at a marketing agency after graduating from college, but she quit because her boss did not share her vision. She has since accepted a number of part-time retail jobs when they ask her to work in between jobs. While building her brand, she lives at our parents' house for free, eating their food and accruing utility bills. Lena spent $15,000 of my parents' retirement money on an absurd online clothing venture that didn't work out. She made a comparison between expensive fashion and sequin-adorned trash bags. Seeing her post these embarrassing business posts while the company was actively failing was the funniest part. Get up and grind. Boss babe? Businesswomen? However, she was unable to even ship customers the right sizes. You get the vibe, haha. Last year for Christmas, Lena had the audacity to offer me a shout-out package on Instagram. "Congratulations," she said, actually handing me a card with her own profile on it. "On Lena Styles, you have been selected for a featured post." What is that? She had been teasing the Apple Watch for months, and I had already spent $350 on it. I even offered to use my logistical expertise to handle shipments, build shelves, and set up spreadsheets in an attempt to support her small business. She dismissed it, saying my business-like style had ruined her originality. She received a ton of complaints about delayed deliveries and incorrect purchases 2 months later. She called me and sobbed about online bullies when customers started leaving bad reviews, hoping that I would get in touch with her and correct the situation. Because I get along well with challenging people. I declined, and for a month, possibly the most peaceful month of my life, she did not speak to me. My folks devour that stuff. She watches Netflix on her MacBook Pro, which her father got her for editing. Mom defends every setback as though it were a badge of honor. Lena is pursuing her interests. No, she's looking into your finances. Whenever I advise Lena to get a legitimate job, the bad guy is me. Sam, you simply don't get the creator economy. The creator economy, in my opinion, means actually creating anything valuable. What do I know, though? The worst was when Lena was texting and crashed her car. Additionally, Mom called me rather than the insurance provider. As if to justify everything she said, I'm too upset to deal with this right now. I found out that they had dropped it to liability only without telling me when I asked about their coverage. Lena's Instagram photos showed that the money had gone to her business retreat in Miami, which looked like a vacation, even though I had paid for their comprehensive policy specifically 6 months earlier. I've essentially been their safety net since the boutique disaster 3 years ago, paying their $200 monthly mortgage. Their house isn't even very nice when they fall behind, which happens roughly every other month. A lovely but aging suburban ranch with 3 bedrooms. If they had adhered to the original 30-year mortgage, they could have paid it off by now. However, they are now 15 years in and have 25 years left because of all the refinancing. Lena couldn't afford the auto repairs last year, so I spent $3,800 on them, but she managed to attend Coachella that month. She neglected routine upkeep until everything broke down. The tires were bald, the timing belt was on the verge of breaking, and the brakes were shot. Even the mechanic, my Uncle Joe, asked if she had a death wish. In the meantime, her Instagram was flooded with images of boats and some guy who had some sort of industry connections. When Dad refused to accept cheaper insurance, I even covered his $200 in medical bills. According to his plan, the hospital food was superior. If he takes his medicine and occasionally eats some greens, he can manage his basic medical conditions. Every time I buy food, the garbage magically disappears and the vegetables deteriorate. Then, wheezing after climbing the stairs, he contacts me to complain that his doctor is trying to con him by suggesting that he exercise and lose weight. Mom's health problems don't get any better. Because she had read online that generic blood pressure drugs are made in China, she insisted on the name brand even though it cost $180 more a month. She accused me of wanting her to die in order to save money when I attempted to clarify that her prescription was for the exact same drug but at a lower cost. She then requested that I take her to 3 different pharmacies in order to locate one that carried the brand she had selected. Due to a work-related injury that kept me in the hospital, I once sent their power bills late. A beam tore my rotator cuff when it fell on my shoulder. I was lucky it wasn't worse, the surgeon said. 4 times Mom called me to ask where the money was. She didn't even inquire about my well-being. We need that transfer today, Sam, she said. I was trying to figure out how to do a bank transfer with one arm in a sling while taking painkillers after surgery. She brought their water and property tax bills to the hospital the following day instead of food or comfort items. She put them next to my Jell-O cup on my lunch tray and started figuring out how much I would have to transfer once I got my workers' compensation money. She then voiced her displeasure with the hospital parking fee and recommended that I pay for it as well over a 3-year period. About $42,000 has been invested in their lives by me. It's not an estimate. I went through and added up all of my bank statements. One dreary Sunday night, groceries, utilities, unpaid debts, medical expenses, auto payments, and mortgage assistance. Everything added up. In the meantime, I live in a gloomy 1-bedroom apartment with pipes that make a demon-calling noise whenever I flush. However, family is family, isn't it? As my savings account dwindled, I kept telling myself that at least. My apartment, which cost $1.03 a month for 680 square feet in a building that was presumably first-rate during the Reagan administration, is not cheap. The amenities are subpar, but the location is good. It's close to most of our job sites. In what was once a storage cupboard, there is an exercise center with 2 dumbbells and a rusted treadmill. Due to filter problems, the pool is closed more often than it is open, but I can only afford it while supporting 2 households. Chris, a friend, kept telling me that I was growing accustomed to it, but I always brush it off. Even though I knew they wouldn't give me $50 if I got stuck, they still do the same for me. He's known me since high school and has witnessed firsthand the financial collapse of the entire family. I've even attempted an intervention once and presented spreadsheets detailing how I could have bought a house by now. When I realized he was just watching out, I apologized after becoming irate and ignoring him for 2 weeks. Last Thanksgiving, Chris's prediction came to pass. I have a genuine 103-degree fever. Death was the feeling. I told my mother over the phone that I was unable to make dinner. What did she say? Who will carve the turkey, though? After playing golf, your father's wrist is still sore. I'm not worried about who would fulfill my designated role, nor do I need anything else. I eventually dragged myself there, perspiring through dinner and spreading the sickness to everyone. Dad had the gall to claim that I had ruined his vacation when he became ill 3 days later. Everything changed when the call came in June. The night was a Wednesday. More hot than anything in my apartment. Terry, the maintenance worker, had been promising, but the air conditioner broke again. Tomorrow, I'll make it right. I had been drinking ice water while lying on my couch in my basketball shorts for the last 2 weeks when my mother's face appeared on my phone. Every few minutes, the window unit I had bought as a backup was making a terrible rattling noise as it struggled in the 94-degree heat. After a 12-hour day of overseeing a concrete pour that had to be finished before the real heat arrived, I had just got home. I still had the bone-deep fatigue that comes from standing all day, and my shirt was drenched in sweat. I assumed she needed groceries or something, so I said, "Hey, Mom." With a phony Cherry accent, she said, "Sam, I wanted to inform you that on the 4th, Lena will be throwing a large pool party at her house. By her place, we're covering everything." Mom was referring to Lena's townhouse, which I was paying $600 a month for because she was unable to pay the full $1,800 rent with her meager earnings from part-time social media consulting jobs. She meant that by covering everything, I would receive a call in a day or 2 requesting help with party supplies. Awaiting the invitation, I waited. It never came. Should I bring anything then? At last, I asked. "Oh," she said, chuckling oddly. "Lena doesn't really want you there. She doesn't want her influencer friends to see her, so she invited them, less prosperous relatives." Not to be disrespectful. I nearly choked. "Are you seriously joking with me, following all that I have done for you all?" "Sam, stop being so sensitive. It's a significant networking opportunity for her. She can't have you talking about construction while wearing your work clothes. It damages her reputation." I glanced down at my faded t-shirt, which had a tiny tear at the hem and the logo of my business on it. Was this the reason Lena was so embarrassed, the reality that I did have a job? Her picture. "I've been covering your bills, Mom, so I live in a shoebox apartment. Last month, I gave Lena $3,000. The $3,000 was intended for a social media course taught by an Instagram expert who claimed to know the keys to making money. This was the investment that would eventually advance Lena's career, she vowed. To pay for it, I had to put off having my truck's transmission serviced. She posted pictures of a brand new designer handbag with the hashtag cellphonevestment a week after I gave her the money. She claimed it was borrowed from a friend for photo shoots when I texted her about it. I looked for that friend's profile, but I couldn't find it. That's up to you, though. You weren't asked to do that anyway. This is essential to Lena's career. Avoid being self-centered." I immediately opened my banking app after hanging up. I had just paid a Walter $500 deposit for a lake house rental for the whole family for the week after the 4th, and they had received $9,800 in the last 4 months alone. For months, Mom had pleaded for a family vacation. This weekend, I had intended to surprise them. It had enough beds to keep us from bumping into each other a pier for fishing, something Dad used to enjoy before he got too lazy to visit a fire pit for s'mores. The Instagram photo from last weekend that showed her posing on a guy's boat with the caption, "Self-Care Sunday," was the cancel link that my finger was hovering over. You can occasionally treat yourself to a nail polish emoji. I had assisted Mom in paying their property tax bill, so I was having ramen for the third time that week. I hit the cancel button. Although refunds were handled, they weren't sufficient, not nearly enough. I let myself experience the anger I had been repressing for the first time in years. All those occasions when I was unable to pay to go out with friends. The time I went to dinner with Rachel, a wonderful architect I met at work, and the dating relationships that ended because I was constantly worried about money or getting calls from my family while on dates, like the vacation days I sold back to my company for extra money that went directly to their bills. Lena called 5 times in a row just as our lunch arrived. When I finally responded, assuming someone had died. It was because she had locked herself out of her Apple account and needed my password right away because she was in the middle of a very important Instagram Live. Rachel never returned my calls following that occasion. The next morning, I called my cousin Jake, who works for the electricity company. "You need a favor?" I asked when he picked up. "What's up, man? You sound pissed." Jake and I were close as youngsters before my family's financial tragedy drove me away from everyone. He'd gotten a good union job right out of high school, bought a modest house with his wife Tara, and had 2 children and a dog, which was the usual stable life I should have had if I hadn't been constantly bailing out my family. I laid out the entire situation. Years of assistance, thousands of dollars taken from my account, and now being barred from the family's 4th of July celebration because I would jeopardize Lena's influencer status. "That is messed up," Jake replied. "Your sister's always been a taker, but your parents should know better." My plan was straightforward. Jake worked in the scheduling department of the energy company. With the impending summer, they were already planning for potential brownouts owing to heavy AC consumption. All he had to do was make sure my parents' area was scheduled for a maintenance outage during peak 4th of July celebration hours. Jake laughed as I explained. "That's wild, dude. I love it. I'm in." "You sure you won't get in trouble?" I inquired suddenly, apprehensive about involving him in my family issue. "Nah. These maintenance outages are scheduled all the time in summer. I'll just move some things around on the calendar. Totally routine paperwork stuff. Nobody will question it." I also contacted my friend Lewis, who does HVAC work. His company was in charge of the maintenance for Lena's townhouse complex. "Are you sure about this?" he said after I explained. "Text me when you want it done." Lewis agreed to postpone the repair order for Lena's air conditioner, which was already showing indications of strain. Nothing risky, just ensuring. Sure, it wasn't mended before the party when it would undoubtedly fail in the heat. All he had to do was move her repair ticket to the after-holiday weekend pile, which was routine procedure given the backlog of emergency calls they received during the heat wave over the next few days. I kept things as normal. Dad called and asked for $200 for party supplies, which I sent without remark. Mom emailed about borrowing my coolers for the party, and I happily dropped them off. Lena did not contact me except to ask if I might promote her party posts a nerve. I also began covertly planning for my own freedom. I phoned my bank to remove my parents as approved users from my backup credit card, which I had put up for emergencies but had somehow become their normal shopping card. I changed all of my passwords and PINs. I even called my cell phone carrier to have Lena removed from my family plan where I'd been paying for her unlimited data for years. The customer service representative inquired whether I wanted to notify the removed line. Definitely not. I replied, "Let her find out the hard way." Jake stopped by my house the day before the 4th with a drink. "All set for tomorrow." He smiled. "Man, this heat wave is supposed to be brutal. Going to hit 97 degrees? Yep, perfect timing." On July 4th, my social media feeds were filled with Lena's pool party preparations. Mom is arranging platters of food. Dad, dressed in a silly grill apron, is assembling new patio furniture that I know I purchased for at some point. Lena poses with her buddies by the pool in her new swimsuit. Family time exuded joy and positivity. The food presentation included costly steaks, exquisite charcuterie boards, and what appeared to be prepared desserts. There were professional-looking decorations everywhere, including balloon arches, personalized banners, and what appeared to be a picture booth complete with props, all for Lena's networking opportunity. I identified the pool floats from my Amazon account. Before I sent them to Lena last week, they had been accidentally delivered to my house. She had neglected to mention that she had placed a $300 order for inflatables on my account. She even pretended to have secured a famous appearance by sharing a story with a mediocre influencer who had 5,000 followers. Having Lifestyle by Jenna at my private pool party bar is such a blessing. Cord-based networking is a blessing. She shared something on Instagram. I kept my phone on mute while Chris and I were at a baseball game that day. Our seats were close to the third baseline. I bought myself a jersey, ate nachos, and a ridiculously expensive drink, and even had dessert. "Are you actually following through on this?" Chris asked. "Yes," I said. "I will no longer be their safety net tonight." It was about time he answered. "With all that extra cash you're not giving them, what will you do with it? I hadn't even thought that far in advance. Perhaps I should begin saving for a home of my own. Alternatively, for once, go on a real vacation. Instead of having to end every night early, I might even start dating again." In order to achieve financial independence, Mom calls regarding the water bill, Chris said, lifting his mug. "My phone blew up when we got home at 11:45 p.m. The entire block lost power," Mom said to Sam. "Give us a call back. My father, we need assistance, son. It's hot in here and there's no power." "Lena, you're correct. How on earth did you do that? All of my influencer friends are departing since the power went out. I'm applying makeup." I went back to reading the messages. I was delighted by each one. It was real satisfaction. "What?" Lena asks. "The party food in my refrigerator is about to go bad. It's thousands of dollars. Please give us a call back, Mother Sam." "There is an urgent situation," Dad answered. "According to the neighbors, the power company says it won't return until the next morning." Social media notifications followed. Lena's update on her Instagram story. "It was the worst night ever. Everything was ruined by a power outage. The universe is putting me to the test." A friend of hers had made a post. "I appreciate the sweat fest. Lena fashions. The next time, perhaps check your electricity bill." Someone else made a comment. "A private gathering. Not even the lights could be kept on sale." It was delicious schadenfreude. Then, for the first time in years, I shut off my phone and dozed off. You don't have to worry about the family emergency that will occur tomorrow. I didn't figure out how much I could afford to spend this month. Just a good sleep without dreams. They kept sending out notifications for 47 missed calls the following day. There were 89 SMS and 23 voicemails. I grinned broadly as I browsed through them. The party was just getting to its zenith when the power went out at Lena's. Jake had intended for a system error to cause their block to be inadvertently deprioritized for restoration. It was still in the 90s at midnight, and everyone had left Lena's steamy, dreary home. Warm drinks, melting ice cream, and a group of sweaty, agitated people were the end of her lovely pool party. However, that was just the start. By 10 p.m., the air conditioner had completely failed. Immediately prior to the power outage, Lewis had verified that there were scheduling conflicts with the emergency repair crew. Without power or air conditioning, Lena's townhouse had turned into an oven, based on the increasingly frantic texts. Within an hour of the power outage, most of her influencer friends had left complaining about the heat and darkness. Lena sent me a text that really got to me. "It's you who has destroyed my credibility." Jenna unfollowed me on Lifestyle. Despite having a bot follower count tragedy, she was going to include me in her upcoming collaboration about the agony of being unfollowed by no one. My parents allegedly brought over battery-operated candles in an attempt to save the day, but it was too little too late. Without fans, music, or air conditioning, the food had started to deteriorate in the heat. The party was soon over. Your father's blood pressure is skyrocketing as a result of the stress caused by Mom's texts. which went from begging to threatening. You are responsible for anything that happens to him. My door was pounded at about 2:00 p.m. Mom and Lena were standing behind Dad, who was sweating and red-faced. He complained that the power was still out. The lake house reservation is now no longer available. How on earth did you do that? I propped myself up on the doorframe, the cool air streaming over me from my flawlessly operating air conditioner. They looked harsh. It was obvious that nobody had slept well in the heat. The frizz in Lena's hair made her look like a grumpy zombie. Dad's shirt was covered in sweat stains and Mom's makeup was smudged. For your party, I suppose I'm not family enough. It's not funny, Sam, but I'm family enough to solve your problems, Dad shouted. That house is 95 degrees. Now fix it. What's not funny? Do you know being treated like dirt? I stepped forward. After I've spent years supporting you all financially. Dad was pushed aside by Lena. A look of anger twisted her face. You intentionally did this. Everything was ruined by you. There, I had actual influencers. My big break might have come from this. Oh, like that girl who sells fake handbags from her mother's basement and has 5,000 followers. Of course, I feel ashamed. I chuckled. You're jealous because you spend your days swinging hammers like a caveman while I'm building something. She shouts. What are you building? Lena, a little debt delusion. Never in your life have you earned an honest dollar. I pulled out the banking app on my phone. Do you want to witness something captivating? This is what I've sent you just in the last 12 months. I looked at the transfers from 50 to 1,200, 600 to 800 and so forth. Just for you, Lena, that's 16,400 excluding the gifts I've given to my parents. What building is that a source of income? Yes, exactly. My job as a caveman. Mom jumped right in. Sam, that's sufficient. You have no right to talk to your sister in that manner. Following everything we've done for you. That was it. Something broke inside of me. Everything you have done for me. Are you seriously joking with me? In 3 years, I've given you $42,000. The apartment I live in is a hole. Lena shares pictures of her opulent lifestyle from a home that I essentially pay for. Lena gave an eye roll. In any case, would you mind letting me use your shower? I look terrible, and my sponsored post is due today. I couldn't believe her courage as I looked at her, while my parents simply stared at me as though I were the issue she understood. I had had enough of this nonsense. Leave now. I gave you all instructions. Leave my building. Please, get out. What the devil do you mean? Mom inquired. Leave now? My neighbor's door cracked open as a result of my loud shout. I will no longer be your fucking wallet. Try it yourself. This is something you will regret. Dad pulled Lena away as she growled. To me, you're dead. Their cries were muffled when I slammed the door. My first action the next morning was to call my bank. My parents sometimes drew from the joint account I had with them, but I froze it. I removed my card from Lena's Apple account where she had been paying her business expenses, and I changed all of my passwords. I canceled recurring transfers to my parents' energy companies and went through my list of automatic payments. The extra insurance I was paying for Dad's car and Lena's cell phone bill. Every cancellation was like cutting off a thread that had been keeping me in place. How much is saved each month overall? Over $2,000, I was bleeding $1,876.45 to support their way of life. After that, I contacted the utility company for Lena's and my parents' residences. It turned out that probably due to their poor credit, I had been secretly reinstated as the guarantor on both accounts last month. All the while, my phone kept blowing up. According to Lena, my Netflix isn't functioning. Now fix it. Why can't I access the emergency fund account? Mom asked Sam, your father's son. This has gotten out of hand. Now cut it off. Do you know what I did in place of answering any of them? I purchased a 3-week ticket to Bali. On Friday, I depart. Because I was too busy saving them, I was unable to afford something I had always wanted to do. Yes, I hired a legitimate travel agent who wanted to make sure everything went according to plan. Helped me find a great deal on a house by the sea. First significant trip. As I made the deposit, she asked. My answer was, this is the first vacation where I'm paying for myself alone. Flights, accommodation, and a few excursions came to $300, which is less than what I typically spend on my family in a month. The family group chat was ablaze by the afternoon. It's unbelievable that you harm your own family, she said. This is mine, Lena, after all we've given up for you, Dad said. I hope you always love being by yourself. Then I got a call from my cousin Jake. Your family is telling everyone that you left them, dude. I just got a call from your aunt asking if you had a mental breakdown. They were spreading rumors that I was harsh, cut them off, and flipped out without cause, Jake told me. Lena was using hashtags like Diner Healing Journey to write heartfelt posts about toxic family members and how money changes people. Her fans, on the other hand, showered her with supportive and encouraging comments. I chuckled and told him to send the messages. She was acting very victimized, claiming that it was hard to cut off family members and attributing her success to jealousy. Which aspect is the best? Room service receipts were easily visible on Lena's Instagram stories as she posted this from her recuperating retreat at the nearby Marriott. She had booked overnight hotel stays after somehow escaping poverty. Jake verified that until their electricity was restored, my parents had temporarily moved in with Lena, obtaining sympathy money from family members by playing the victim card. It was said that after listening to their heartbreaking tale, my aunt had sent them $500. I remained silent. Let them spin whatever it is that helps them fall asleep at night. The game is over for me. I ignored their calls and prepared for my vacation for the rest of the week. I bought some hiking equipment, a good camera, and new clothes, things I had always wanted, but could never justify, because the money was always going toward helping someone else out in their time of need. My neighbor then noticed me in the parking lot on Wednesday. Your family was back here earlier, dude, spending 20 minutes hammering on your door. Is everything okay? They appeared enraged. I apologized, I said. Drama in the family. The night before my trip on Thursday, my dad texted me. Every night, your mother sobs herself to sleep. I hope you're content. For the first time in days, I answered. In fact, I'm happier than I've been in a long time. Tomorrow, I'm taking a plane to Bali. Stay away from me. Almost instantly, Mom sent a message. While we're having trouble, you're taking a vacation. What made you so self-centered? They were all blocked by me. I completed the packing. I got a tasty meal for myself. I wasn't thinking about their next crisis or counting pennies for once. Not at all. Instead, I was on vacation. You won't believe how crazy things got while I was away. I just got home from my trip and I was completely stunned by what I found. I never thought it would get so out of hand, but here we are. I still find it hard to believe that my family's refusal to let me enjoy my one vacation in peace caused it to devolve into complete chaos. Hold on tight. Allow me to explain what has already occurred. Bali was great, first and foremost. 3 weeks of hiking beaches, delectable food, and no family strife. I had completely stopped using social media in order to prevent them from following my whereabouts or activities. For the first time since I became an adult, they couldn't reach me at all. At my resort, I made new friends, including an Australian couple who were shocked to learn that I had never been on a trip. There were many amusing stories there, but that isn't what we are talking about. Now for the part you've all been waiting for. For the first time in weeks, I switched on my phone when I got home. As anticipated, the assault started right away, resulting in hundreds of voicemails, emails, texts, and missed calls. Without reading the challenges they had caused, I eliminated them all. However, I was no longer concerned about my absence. But when I got to my apartment complex, I had a weird feeling. The person at the front desk looked at me oddly. Man, I'm glad you're back. Almost every day, your family has been making a scene here. Fantastic. When I opened my door, I specifically requested this. I became aware that something was seriously amiss. My apartment had been broken into. Yes, let's say we have no idea who it is. The closet was empty, drawers were taken out, and furniture was moved. After that, I saw they had a key. How could I have missed this? Years ago, I recalled my mother had coerced me into giving her a spare for emergencies. In my rush to escape, I had forgotten all about it. My laptop was gone, and they didn't simply walk away, which was the first thing I noticed. They took it and gave it back. All of my files had recently been accessed, so I knew. My filing cabinet was then a mess. There are important documents everywhere. I misplaced my social security card. I can't find my birth certificate. That wasn't the worst part, though. I looked at my desk where I had a sealed, fireproof box containing my $2,500 emergency fund for real emergencies. The box remained, but it was empty. My sock drawer had been flipped upside down, and there was the key inside. I immediately pulled out my phone to check my credit report because there was a loan application pending with my details. New credit cards that had been opened in my name during my 2-week vacation, and cards that had already been maxed out. While I was away for almost a month, they had stolen my identity. They only needed that. I called the police right away and reported theft and identity fraud. I then gave my bank a call. I'm glad I was smart enough to turn on 2-factor authentication before I left. Despite their repeated attempts, they were unable to get past the security measures that required sending codes to my international phone number in order to access my account. The bank tightened security after determining that the attempts were suspicious. I was in excruciating pain for the next 3 days, phoning credit bureaus, filing fraud alerts, contesting charges, and documenting every detail. My fears were confirmed by the identity theft protection program I enrolled in. All of the applications were completed on Lena's laptop and submitted from my parents' IP address. Not that they'd tried to hide it. Why they didn't think I would make it this far. I told my cousin Jake everything over the phone. For a minute, Jake remained quiet. They've been telling everyone that you abruptly left them. Your mother has been actively playing the victim, sharing on Facebook that they're having financial difficulties paying their medical bills. I'll guess. They've made no mention of robbing my apartment or stealing my identity. Jake laughed and said, "Shockingly no. But you should be aware of this. Lena has been boasting about getting even with you to my wife's cousin, claimed to have taught you the value of family loyalty. In some circles, she's not exactly keeping it a secret." Excellent. Over the next week, I made sure everything was secure, installed cameras in my apartment, changed the locks, and collected all evidence of theft and fraud. After that, my father texted me, "We must speak. Tomorrow night is family dinner. I'm going to call your boss regarding your extended vacation, so be there." They then discussed workplace dangers. Good. I called my supervisor first, but I didn't respond. He is a trustworthy person. I just wanted to warn you that my crazy family may try to cause trouble. He chuckled. Give it a shot. Your work is self-evident. However, I appreciate the warning. I took my completed evidence file to the police station rather than going to their family dinner. My case's investigator started going over my extensive documentation. This is both open and closed. Within 48 hours, we will begin making arrests. She kept her word, and the next day, my dad and Lena were picked up. What do you like best about being a resident of a small town? Nothing is still a secret. When followers, mostly college classmates who learned everything from Instagram chatter, discovered that Lena's luxurious lifestyle was founded on fraud and theft, her beloved social media accounts went viral. As the news spread, my parents' friends started to turn away. I won't bore you with the legal process in its entirety now, but ultimately their defense was pitiful. We were simply reclaiming the money he owed us for his upbringing. Neither the jury nor the judge believed it. Because of their age and impeccable past records, my parents were placed on probation and needed financial counseling. Lena did not have the same luck. She received 18 months for the laptop evidence and her prior shoplifting case. It did not help that she sobbed in court about her influencer career being destroyed. The best part was the reparations order. They have to pay back everything they took in addition to identity theft damages. Instead of coming from me, a check is sent to me each month. Now how's that for karma? As soon as my lease is up, I plan to move out of that location. I've already started searching for a home in a new area that is secure and doesn't give out extra keys.